All right, welcome everyone. We'll get started here in just a second. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a great day. I'm actually sitting in Kansas City. It's not my home. I'm from Phoenix, so I'm sitting in a hotel from Kansas City. We got people from around the world coming in. Kind of looking forward to chat with everyone here in a second. All right, looks like everybody's in. Well, welcome again, everyone. Appreciate you joining this second of a series of 4 webinars we have. This webinar series, just to give you a real quick history, if you didn't sit in on our first webinar last week, you can always get that recording. Any of the panelists here are putting that recording out on our social media, so you get a chance to look at it. This started several months ago, just having a discussion amongst professionals and friends that said, "Hey, let's just do a couple of webinars, unsponsored webinar. We're not putting logos out there. We sit around and we talk about these things, and we thought it would be nice to allow some other people to sit and listen to the conversations that we all have at a happy hour sometimes. So it's kind of nice to hear some of those different pieces. But we really wanted to get some of the top experts from around the world and to talk about this idea called digital trust. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we're talking about today. But we started off last week with an overall, hey, what is this thing called digital trust? Trying to demystify that whole idea. But we wanted to make sure that we took this into a couple different levels. So today we're going to be talking about framework standards and laws. Our next webinar, which will be next week, these are being done every Thursday. We'll start to link digital trust into security, zero trust. Get a lot of questions on, hey, what's the difference between zero trust and digital trust? And then we'll finish this off with the emerging technology, where a lot of folks may have questions about AI, quantum computing. Who knows, right? We're going to take that and really jump in to what we believe the next steps are into a pretty rapidly changing environment out there. So here's what we're talking about today. It is overwhelming, the number of frameworks, standards, bodies of knowledge, and then add on top of that legislation, add on top of that laws, legal requirements, and so on. So we thought we'd try to walk through and see what some of the key things are out there that we're looking at from a digital trust perspective, and maybe any other frameworks that might be applicable, and give some hints and some ideas on how do you pick one, how do you implement, what are some things to look out for. Okay. All right, so we're going to jump in. Let's talk about the team here. So this is what we're talking about right now. We're talking about frameworks. Real quick introduction. Again, Mark Thomas, I'll be your host. I'll also be adding some of my commentary along with some of the other pros out here. I'm from Phoenix, sitting in Kansas City. We've got Rolf. Rolf von Rossing is coming to us from Switzerland. Is that where you're sitting right now, Rolf? You go around the world.
Well, I'm in Switzerland. This is
All
my
right.
home office. It's actually a real background. So yes, I'm working at home. But you're right. Last week I was out in Portugal. Just returned like the day before yesterday. I get around a bit.
Very cool. Well, we're glad to get you while you're at home. Sorry, we got to invade your personal space there. Yeah, we've got Sushila Nair's talking to us from Greater Washington, D.C. area. Good morning. How's the weather out there?
Good morning. Actually, today it's not too bad, Mark. The sun is shining, so yeah.
Yep. Don't you guys have, and I'm embarrassed, isn't there like a big like flower and kite festival right around this time of year that goes on?
Yes, I love it. Yes, yes. Just in
Okay.
central DC, they do kite fighting and people bring their own kite designs. We've also got Embassy Day coming up where
That's
the embassies throw open their doors. So yeah,
that's
great time in the spring.
awesome. Awesome. Well, my son lives out there. I need to take another trip out. Maybe we'll go out and grab a coffee while I'm there. Faisal Javed's talking to us from Lahore, Pakistan. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm there, Mark. Thank you very much for calling us over there. People around the world.
You got it, man. Thank you very much, and appreciate you joining us. From let's see, you're at least 12 hours ahead of me, I think, right?
Yeah, it's around 5 o'clock in the evening right here.
Yeah. Well, it's going to get worse when we hit Gary Barnes here in a couple seconds. Gary,
I
you're,
did have
it's
to
even
rush from the
later for
office.
you in Australia.
Yeah, hi there. Just gone 10 p.m. here, so it's getting late for me, but
Well,
wonderful to be here.
Good. Awesome, Gary. Thank you very much. Shannon Donahue's coming to us from Chicago. Do you guys still have snow on the ground, or is it getting summertime yet? Or
Well,
spring?
it's far from summer and there's no snow on the ground, but it has been snowing. It was snowing Monday and Wednesday, so it is cold here.
Well, we hope it warms up for you all. Finally, we've got Greg Witt talking to us. Are you in Maryland today, Greg?
I am in Maryland. I'm not far from Shushila, but
Yeah.
I'm avoiding downtown.
Yeah, I don't blame you. All right, well, welcome everybody. I appreciate it. So let's go back and talk for the panelists as well as any of the attendees. A couple of things I want to walk through first is feel free to ask questions during our discussion. I have the Q&A window open. We may not be able to get to every single question, but if you have a question for one of the specific panelists, hey, just say, hey, this question is for this person, and so on. I'll try to get to those and make sure that we can get those assigned out as much as we can. If we don't get to your questions, we will not be sending out an addendum that with the answers of the questions we missed. My suggestion to you is you have the contact information for every single one of these panelists, and that contact information was on that the registration page when you signed up for this webinar. So feel free to keep in touch, and you probably know most of these panelists anyway, but that'll be the way for you to be able to ask questions a little bit later on. So again, we said we might not get to everything. We want to be very, very conscious of time. What's interesting is you might think, wow, an hour and a half, that's a long time. Believe me, when you're on panels like this, an hour and a half goes very, very fast. We will be recording this session, and within the next day, you'll see many of us starting to publish the recording for this, so you get a chance to go out and take a look if there's something you want to see again, or if obviously for people who aren't on the panel on the webinar. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, I think that's a great way for us to get started here. What we've done is put together a couple of key questions and key discussion points that we wanted to hit and share amongst each other, as well as everybody else out there listening. And we thought this would make sense. This is a very broad topic here. And we want to talk about what's taking place in the landscape. Remember, we kind of chuckled about framework exhaustion, right? There's a framework for everything, right? And now there's a law for everything, because as soon as somebody does something wrong, we create a compliance requirement for it. Get it, right? But we want to really kind of hone in on the digital trust side of this and say, okay, there's a lot of things out there, and hit this. Now, I personally am not, and some of the panelists might, I'm personally not aware of any laws or regulations that says thou shall digital trust, right? I don't think there are, but we might find out in this panel. But I do know that there are bodies of knowledge. There are a lot of frameworks out there, standards that might kind of address this. In fact, I was last night I was I was reading through the NIST AI RMF, the risk management framework for AI, and it has in the title trustworthy AI. And so I was like, that's kind of nice. We're starting to see trust show up. So it might not be specifically designed for digital trust, but it certainly addresses trust. So we've got Rolf on. Rolf, so you might have heard, we know Rolf travels the world. Rolf does a lot around this space. I thought it might make sense. Rolf, if you don't mind kicking off and telling us a little bit about what do you see globally now when it comes to laws, frameworks, standards, all these things. What is it overwhelming, or there's some good ones to look at right now?
Well, thanks for asking that, Mark. I think it's fairly fragmented. If we start with the top layers, say the laws, the statutes, that you don't have anything specific on digital trust, but what you see is that it's kind of built into the fabric of various European acts, whether that be artificial intelligence, critical infrastructures, or others. And you can also see that in a sideways manner, it comes in indirectly. It's implied in the laws that, for instance, where you talk about cybersecurity, where you talk about risk management, there's always an element of integrity, breaches of integrity, and therefore the result would be a loss of trust. Now, in Roman law countries like here in Europe, most of them except the UK and Ireland, you would find that if someone trusts in something, or if someone places trust in another party prior to entering into a contract, and then that trust is disappointed, the trusting party may then seek legal remedy against the other party, saying, well, I trusted you to do this, I spent money, and so forth. So it's kind of inbuilt at the legislative level, but it's not explicit. And if you go one level further down, all these standards, there seem to be a number of schools of thought. You got the mainstream, the orthodox, shall I say, security folks. They point you to 27001 and 27701 for privacy and then PII. You then have the more commercial side of things, where large ticks like SGS or DNVGL, they are proposing certification accreditation frameworks for digital trust based on their own more or less proprietary catalogs of criteria. So if you take the formerly known as Swiss Digital Trust label, and now it's just the Digital Trust label, the initiative in Switzerland gave it to SGS, a very large international certification firm, and they converted it into a commercial offering based on a self-developed catalog. However, that's not really peer-reviewed or anything. And then, like I said, you have other commercial things like the partnership of KPMG and the WEF, where the WEF proposed certain criteria for digital trust. They go mainly in the direction of, ethical use, responsible use, that kind of thing. And finally, you've got the ISO organization itself that has recently suggested a thing that they call the DTSP, the Trust and Safety Partnership. So they are placing their emphasis on trust in safety, as in safe products, Cyber Resilience Act, and other things, coming from an entirely different direction if you compare them to WEF. So all that said, it is out there, but the only thing I have seen that works vendor agnostically and that works in an impartial, objective manner is ISACA's framework, the details that Shannon's going to talk to a little later.
Okay, very. It's interesting when you kind of think about it's hard to tell somebody, from a regulatory perspective that your customers or your users should trust you, right? You never know, right? We're going to talk about measurement here in a little bit, but I'm glad you brought up the World Economic Forum. That was actually one of the first digital trust related frameworks I think I ever read, right? And it introduced me to a lot of really good stuff. It seemed to be very high level and principled, as you'd expect from the WEF. But I think you're right. I think we've been able to take that and create a couple more detailed areas. And of course, Shannon, we want to talk with you a few minutes about ISACA's DTEF. But we talked about ISO standards, a lot of other things. Greg Witt, you've done a little bit of work with NIST here in North America in the past. You seen anything from the NIST perspective on that?
I have. I've been fortunate to work with them for the last 20 years. And one of the things we learned was that, when we first started coming out with some of the models, we found that some of the end users were kind of chasing the compliance side of things. And of course, all of us have seen you can be completely secure and yet not be trustworthy. So NIST had an intentional approach, especially Dr. Ron Ross, who's just about to retire, but he still is a great mentor for me. And he started really pressing the idea of trustworthiness. And as you've seen, it carries through to everything we're doing. But it's been important for us to kind of shift that focus from conformance compliance to really understanding how are we going to ensure the trust that Rolf was describing.
Very cool. So Faisal, so you've done a little bit of looking and researching in different types of frameworks and things out there. I think you were sharing with some information on some comparisons you had done in the past. Did you have that you'd like to share with everyone?
Yeah, of course. I'll share with you because I'm working with a lot of standards, especially for ISO, over the last 25 years. And thanks to Rolf, he has already nominated the name of the company. I'm basically from SGS. So we do a lot of things, a lot of stuff in this regard. So let me just share with you. I was able to fetch some. When you see the screen, please do let me know.
It's coming.
Okay, so let me put it into the. Okay, can you see it now?
Can now, yep.
I need to put it into the presentation mode to get it more clear. basically what I did, just for the sake of understanding, that you can see different frameworks, as Rolf has mentioned, and they will attract different trust pillars, which you have taken from even from the World Economic Forum, or my my first love is, you can say, ISACA. So they have developed, and you are the one of the architects, and with Shannon and other Brian Rolf also. So I've just tried to link these standards, which I've been working for a long time, along with the trust pillars over here, you can see. And you have just named the NIST AI RMF and the EU AI Act. So these are two very, very important regulations, which are emphasizing the trustworthiness within the AI, which is the most important thing, I would say, in these days, because that is the major trust level, and the way the things have been violated in the ethics or other things. So that is this is setting the ground standard. And now I have seen many other countries jumping in and adding their regulations into it. So keeping in view, I just keep the overall picture that what are the trust pillars which these particular standards are addressing, and what are the unique strengths. But later on, we will discuss more on this when we talk about how to implement them and how to get them into the measurement factors, and how to see whether they can be implemented by all the organizations or not. So
A lot
you
of
can
stuff in
see
there, yeah.
Yeah, 27,001 for information security. Then we have privacy, then AI governance, 42,001. I would like to highlight, this is one of the first standard here. Then you have NIST cybersecurity framework, the SOC 2 analysis, the service organization from building the trust. So all these are in front of you. So we can share later on a little bit more on this.
So got a question for you all out there. I don't know if you all see it or not. It says FIDA, Financial Data Access Regulations, allows each member state in the EU to come up with their own scheme to comply, but what InfoSec framework would protect any financial data scheme to foster digital trust? Does that make sense? I'm not
Yes,
sure.
actually,
I may see if one of you all can maybe answer that on the side if you'd like.
anybody else would like to take up, or I'll.
Very
I
good.
don't
All right.
want to keep.
I'll tell you what, let's do. Hey, thanks for that. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen here real quick. And then anybody else, anything else we want to hit on the frameworks, laws? Because what I want to do is we've talked about these high level things, and we said there's some things out there, but I want to zone in a little bit on the DTAF, or the Digital Trust Ecosystem Framework, in a second. Any closing comments on this one?
Mark, I'll just add a couple of things. So
Please.
just to back up, I guess, what Rolf was saying, just looking at laws here in Australia, we've had the sort of similar privacy laws for many years, since the 80s even. But a recent one we've had here was security and critical infrastructure. And what was fascinating about that, when it's a national law, it has a very wide definition of critical infrastructure. Not just utilities, but includes banking, it includes food services, food delivery, and quite a wide focus across the society, I guess. And when I think about that kind of the WEF decision, the World Economic Forum definition of digital trust, it actually has that societal statement in there. And I think we're starting to see nations now look at digital trust in this information age as affecting quite a wide range of industries. And so that's out there in Australia. It's kind of a high profile at the moment. There's regulations in our banking that's starting to extend kind of operational risk and resilience and a whole raft of things kind of in that area. And just back in terms of kind of bodies of knowledge slash standards slash frameworks, one that comes up a lot, I think, is SABSA, and then there's TOGAF, sort of architectural frameworks. And I think they're really powerful pieces to add to the discussion. And I'm no expert in either, but they're certainly quite interesting to kind of bring in. And I did like in the DTEF, and I know, Shannon will probably cover it maybe, there's an architectural piece right there in DTEF. So I'll hand back to you now, but that's kind of what I wanted to add there.
No, and that makes total sense because the architecture piece you mentioned, TOGAF. We'll hit this in a second here. There was a lot of architectural discussion going on, but it's interesting as you talked about kind of the view from Australia and some of the legal requirements. You know, when you talk about trust, and we hit this a little bit in our last webinar, a lot of people think about it as a financial transaction as opposed to an interaction, and there's a lot of different relationships that can take place. That relationship could be between you and me, Gary, right? We could have digital trust between us. I may trust you, but I may not trust the technology that we're communicating through. There is business to government, right? I have to do annual reports to my government, and I have to pay taxes to my government. I do that online. Do I trust that? You've got, consumer to business. You've got, business to business. So many different types of interactions. I think this is broad enough where that term digital trust can hit anything, whether you're an NGO, if you're a not-for-profit, a church group, right? I may trust my church, but not trust how they communicate with me, right? So a lot of different
Mark,
ways.
driving home today, that 6-hour road trip I did, device to human, my car, telling me where the nearest charger is, in case I need it. The trust that goes into me arriving home safely, driving an automobile, kind of whole Internet of Things stuff.
Mhm.
There's just so much in terms of our kind of modern life now, where we're placing our hands, our trust in the hands of devices and companies and businesses and third parties and all of that.
Got it. Hey, Sushila, you've kind of had some work in this space a little bit. Did you have some closing points you want to help us make on this one before we move on?
Yes, I think that, that we also have an evolution going on, if not a revolution, right? Digital is really changing our world at an extraordinary speed, and our rules and regulations are gradually maturing to actually deal with digital, as well as our knowledge in that space. And where we started with secure by design, wouldn't it be nice? Well, actually, we started by, hey, just design. Then we moved to secure by design as we started seeing things like breaches. And now I think we need to move to trusted by design. And that is simply an evolution that we're seeing. And so where existing security frameworks do so much to help us provide some kind of structure on the way that we secure our environments, and we're doing a wonderful job with that, it doesn't address some of the issues that we're seeing today, like transparency and accountability, which I know Shannon's going to step forward and talk about. And embedding these principles within our existing frameworks and building upon it the way that ISACA has done, I think the laws and regulations will catch up, and there are those gaps there. So I just wanted to add that, Mark. And
Yeah, no,
also,
it totally makes sense. In fact, I have a question or a subject coming up that's going to take some of the things you just said, and I think you can take them to the next level for us on helping people succeed with each one of these. So that is awesome. Now, I do want to point out that Shannon, your name has come up at least 7 times before now. So the pressure's on. Pressure is on. So, we've talked about frameworks and standards, right? And like, I'm going to be very transparent. Hey, everybody on this call is an ISACA member. This is not an ISACA webinar, but it's an association that we all are a part of. And I will tell you that this framework called the DTEF is the framework out there that really covers every piece of digital trust, regardless of the organization. So, a lot of people have probably read a lot about it, seen a few things on it. I want to kick off with you. Tell us about this thing called the ISACA DTEF.
Okay, doke. Well, I'm not even really sure where to start these conversations. I'll kind of go around and I think, one of the things that was just pointed out, and that Sushila and I were talking about before the call started, was, first of all of these frameworks are there, right? We have security frameworks, privacy frameworks, risk frameworks, governance frameworks, laws, standards, everything under the sun, they don't ever seem to work together. There are several problems in the kind of litany of frameworks. The first one I would say is what I just said, that they're not really working together towards a common goal. The second one is that they're often siloing businesses, right? So you could have your security team working on becoming 27001 certified, right? You could have your privacy team working on different laws within either the EU or in the United States, different state laws. There's all kinds of things going on, and they rarely work together. So we don't have teams marching to a common goal, right?
Mm.
And that's hard. They also might accomplish something to improve security, improve privacy, and improve those outcomes within an organization, right? We don't do a great job of measuring them. We do a worse job of communicating them to our supply chain and to our customers, right? So nobody knows all of the steps that we've taken to provide all of these practices that would ensure trustworthiness. I think the DTAP, we started talking about it 4 years ago. And just so you guys know, Greg and Mark and Rolf were all in the room as we, built this several times. We released it in March of 2024. And what we've done is really looked at the entire organization and kind of elements of what we would consider to be core tenets that would create a trustworthy environment, right? So we have quality, we have availability, we have security and privacy, ethics and integrity, transparency, honesty, resilience. And then we started looking at the places in the organization that we really needed to cover. And so we do, I think Gary mentioned architecture. We are covering architecture. We're covering governance. We're covering things like human factors and how people interact with the technology, and do they understand it, whether they're inside the organization as an employee or outside. And then we really started looking at what are all those practices that we can put together so that the entire organization is marching towards one goal, which is to create and maintain a trustworthy environment. I think, some of the problems that we've talked about in a global economy that is, digital based is that, people, it's very complex. The problems are not like point A to point B. Most standards and frameworks are going to put in a control that is like, here is the problem and here is how I control the problem. The digital trust framework really looks at relationships in an organization and shows how a problem in one organization or one business unit is impacted by changes in another, right? So the criticality of working together as an organization is really, really important with the DTEF. I am not going to go into explaining the DTEF as a whole or as a framework or what all of the different pieces are. I will tell you that it is available for you on ISACA.org. We released several pieces. We released the framework itself, the implementation guidance. There is a board briefing so that you can bring your executive team and board members along with you for this journey. And there is also some training available, a foundations course. There is a 1-hour course. These things are all available so that you can learn the detail around the framework. I think, when we're talking about standards and frameworks, the one that I hear the most often is, zero trust. And I think, when we were talking about this in our governance meetings at ISACA, we used to say all the time, zero trust does go with digital trust, right? And Rob Clyde, who was on our board and is a great guy, used to tell us all the time, I believe that zero trust is a way that you get. It's something that you're doing to get to digital trust. It's one piece of it, right? And I think that you can maintain that for all of these frameworks. If you're using ISO or you're using COVID, or you are looking at the AI RMF because you're integrating AI in your organization, or the EU AI Act, all of those provide activity that help you get to the outcome of digital trust, right? So take a look at it. It is aligned to all of these frameworks. You do have the ability. We're releasing in a few months. You guys will hear more about it in June, I think. The ability for you to go into the digital platform and do self-assessments of where you're at in your organization, and then it will show you the mapping to the global frameworks that Faisal was talking about before, right? They're all there, all of the major ones. So that was long.
No, actually, that's a good point, because we got a question. Someone says, "Hey, how do we get this? Do we download it, or are they only to members? How does that work for, say, maybe someone who's not an ISACA member? Can they get access?"
Yeah. So if you go on to ISACA.org, there is a section under resources, and you can get to digital trust there. The content is now in a digital publishing platform. And so go to .org. Some of these resources are free to members, and some of them are paid assets. But yep, ISACA.org, and you can either just search digital trust or go under the resources tab, and you'll find it.
Very cool. Hey, so one of the things you mentioned, and actually, thank you for mentioning that. So we have 4 people in this session who were part of that kind of original creation of this, and Greg, you, myself,
creators.
Yeah, yeah, and Rolf. Rolf, I want to go to you next, right? You kicked us off with frameworks, gave us kind of the what it looks like, very high level. Shannon just gave us a nice little dive into the detail. You were one of the what I would call one of the chief architects of this whole thing too, right? What's your perspective here? Did you just have a bunch of people sitting in a room making up what they thought were the best practices, or how did this work?
Well, part of it was that. I mean, you were there, Mark, and Greg and Shannon. No, seriously speaking, what we did was we started off from a model that was first devised in the year 2006, I think, for security purposes. And we found that perhaps you could even share it for us, Mark, on the screen, like a little detailed diagram. We found that in contrast to static frameworks and, Excel spreadsheets and other things, it was quite versatile and dynamic in that it has very clear nodes and it has interconnections between the nodes that allow you to group things in buckets and make sure you cover all aspects of digital trust. And if you look at the overarching model, and it's quite visible, the diagrams out there on the web elsewhere. I can also send you various.
It'll be visible on the screen here in just a minute.
Yeah. Anyway, so we found that the model was very good as a tool to organize our own thoughts around digital trust, because for nodes like the organization, the people, the technology, or the processes, we were able to come up with a set of trust factors underneath that would be rather specific to the interaction between these various nodes. One interaction might be called culture. Another one might be called human factors. The third one might be called architecture. So based on these notions, we then developed trust factors gradually. We tested this, of course, through peer review and various expert groups, subject matter experts. And then we built up, if you will, there you see the model. We built up a hierarchy of things that sit underneath these trust factors, filling them with life. You would have practices there, and there can be anything between 3, 5, 10 practices that are supporting the trust factor. And underneath practices, you would find activities, and activities are linked to outcomes. This is the operational level of the model. And having said that, just like COBIT or other frameworks that ISACA has published before, we managed to bridge the gap between what you see here, which is like a dynamic systemic thing, and the more flat world framework structure that you may have been used to in the past. The other aspect that we covered was that, elephant in the room, most people responded to us saying, yet another framework. Oh no, please don't do this to us. And we said, no, it's not. What you see here is, if you will, a set of activities, outcomes with associated controls, key risk indicators, key performance indicators. How you perform these activities, how you reach the outcome, is then often linked to extraneous things that you already have. If you look at cybersecurity as an important factor of trust that is influencing this whole model, you would probably see that if you have the NIST CSF in place, or you work towards ISO 27001, these will naturally map to the DTEF. And that means you do not have to rework, or you don't have added workloads. You can seamlessly bring in on board, if you will, all these things that you already have. And it's only where you find that there are gaps or certain weaknesses, only there do you need to actually add things and do a little more work. So I kept telling people in the development phase, look, we're not building a framework that supersedes anything that was there before. We're building a framework that integrates, and this is why it's called an ecosystem. The ecosystem is very important to me because it means that the flat, static, every 3 years rhythm of ISO 27001, for instance, will come into the fold of being dynamic, being part of an ecosystem. If my ISO cert was done in 2022 and is up for renewal now, how true is that certification going to be by way of digital trust? Much has happened since 22. We know that. So is it still good, or is it like coming to the best before date? Is it just a piece of paper? So the DTEF remediates that because it brings all those standards and certifications in, but it keeps you on your toes by making it dynamic and making sure you measure this continuously. And I think the next question is going to address that. Faisal will talk to this. And you have an opportunity to actually know where you stand day by day rather than every 3 years. So this model and the underlying sort of mechanism of trust factors, practices, activities, and outcomes, and then the various artifacts around it is something fairly new. And to my knowledge, something that the other frameworks couldn't do.
Right.
That makes sense, Mark? Greg?
It does. It does to me. It makes sense. And what everybody can't see beyond this is for each one of those tensions between those nodes, that's kind of a major organizational point for us. And that's where those trust factors are put under each one of those. So I really like it. And this, what I like about the model is it shows that, as Shannon was mentioning, and you mentioned as well, is when there's a modification or a change to one part of the system, it has an effect somewhere else, and that's where this kind of came together. And Greg, you were actually on this team too, and you had a lot to do with us helping with some of the NIST stuff that came in and those pieces. What are some of your perspectives on this one?
Well, and one of the things I love about this model, and it evolved as you were describing. If you look at many of the things we do at NIST and other places, they're very much about the technical, the architecture, the direct to monitor type of things. But I love in the DTF that there's so much of it is about the human side. If we look at what could go so well and what can go so wrong, it's often about that human side of things. So when you look at you started us off talking, Mark, about culture. The DTEF includes a whole section on managing and fostering a culture of trust, looking at the emerging factors, even asking employees, what should we do? How could we make this better? Asking our customers, how can we make this better? So I don't know if we'd call it the soft side of it, but I love the human factor side of how digital trust, really fosters not just doing what you got to do because you got to do it, but really thinking about what should we be doing to improve trust and what can we do as far as human factors, culture, emergence. It's just one of the best things. And again, as Shannon pointed out, it's not something you do instead of one of the other frameworks. It's how you use the other frameworks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think these are all really interesting points. And I know we can go on for hours about this because we literally did for 2 years. But I think one of the important things to say, and Greg, you just brought up culture. Okay. Even if we're all working together, okay, We are continuing, even right now on this panel, to discuss all of the practices we're doing to build trust, right? Whether it's in the security domain or the assurance domain, we're building trust. Without that culture piece, nobody knows, right? And I touched on it earlier, like we do a really bad job sometimes of communicating on all the great things that we are doing. Trust it's an interesting concept because it isn't that we're not trying to build it so that we trust ourselves, right? We know we're working hard and putting good practices in every day. We need the ecosystem to trust us, right? And that culture piece really does have a lot. You can see it's between the organization and people. People doesn't just mean the employees. We have to let people know, whether it is our partners or whether it is our customers or whether it is, for partners down the supply chain, that we are doing these things and that they can trust us, because the important trust piece comes from them trusting the organization and wanting to return and showing the organization benefit from doing all these wonderful practices. That said, you have to build them internally. You have to build these practices. And I know that when I say, this is a whole organization effort and you really need to bring everybody along, there's probably a lot of eyes rolling and being like, that's not always going to work. And who's running digital trust in the organization? And I would want to point out that, that is what you need to do ideally, right? However, if you have control of your area only, we have created like focus area specific views for what you need to do in your area. So if you're security, or if you're quality, or if you're governance, or if you're assurance or risk, privacy, those things exist so that where do I go and implement these practices, and what are the specific controls and KRIs that I need to ensure that security or privacy is implementing the good practices. But I do think, we as a community need to get better about how do we build the trust outside. And that isn't just building the practices and managing our organization in a safe and secure way. It is also, how are we communicating externally so that we do see because we are seeing benefits if customers are trusting the organization, significant benefits, right? So how is that working? And we're going to talk about measurement, and we can talk about how you measure it internally. That external measurement is really important too. So
yeah, and people ask all the time, how do you measure this? I think that's a great way to kind of, we'll move on to the measurement here in just a few seconds. But a couple of things that you mentioned that I like, and then I want to open it up to the rest of the panel, because I'm sure some other folks have some perspectives here. I do like how you mentioned the digital supply chain, right? Because we have a lot of vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities are fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh generation away from us, and they may be organizations that are in environments that are not heavily regulated. And so that creates a huge vulnerability for us too. And so I think it's important for everybody to kind of note that, yeah, we considered those things as well, but we know we can't control fifth generation suppliers, right? We have to kind of depend on our third and fourth for those things. And the word ecosystem was important here too, right? Because an ecosystem is a system of systems, and it's getting very complex now. So I know that the four of us who are kind of part of that creation have been chit-chatting a lot about it, but I want to open it up for everyone else for some comments, observations on the DTEF or anything like that before we move on.
Yeah, just a note, Mark. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, perfectly. Yep.
Yeah, because I've been working with these standards over the last 2-3 decades, and I can see, because I was one of the reviewer in the guideline when you people did all the work. So
So
I
you
can
made that
really
comment.
feel,
You made that comment,
yeah,
didn't you?
yeah. I feel that yes, this is the human touch, or the emotional touch which you need in the trust environment, that what is the perception about yourself and how the people feel about you. And that is something which we were missing in all these standards for privacy and quality. But although they can support, But there are certain requirements which I have gone through. They're very much related to the human factor, which is very, very important in the digital trust.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Anybody have any closing comments on the DTEF? If, as you know, as a shameless plug, go out to the ISACA site. There really are a lot of good things out there. The e-reader is actually very easy to use, pretty cool document. For any of you on the senior side, the board briefing is a really succinct document that explains this from a kind of executive strategic level. So it's a good document as well. So.
Mike,
Right.
just one quick comment. Sorry,
Come on.
yeah. I think one of the things that might come up is people saying things like, I've already invested in ISO 27001, which we've, been mentioned a little bit here, or I've invested in SABSA or whatever. What I liked about DTEF when it came out, and as I look at it, and I really love the laminate with the sort of 6 pages of nice graphics. That's kind of my level of
Yeah.
or approach to things. What I like about it is it opens up some new thinking, right? So people who are already ISO certified can pick this up and go, have we got this piece covered yet? And it adds to that. I love the systems thinking stuff about it. But the other thing is the DTEF tends to allow us to take a kind of higher level lens, instead of just a privacy silo or a security silo or cyber silo or assurance silo. It allows us to see all of those, perhaps, and embrace them all and bring them in and look at how will we approach all of this in terms of our organizational outcome, digital trust. So I kind of like that, that's where my thinking has been around it. How do I bring this together? And not throw out investments that companies, businesses, government agencies may have made already in other frameworks in kind of siloed areas. That this is about trying to embrace that at a kind of higher level, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yep, agree with you. That's a great way for us to push into that next subject is measuring trust. This is interesting, right? A lot of people have tried to crack the code on how trustworthy you are, right? You could say, hey, Mark, your organization or you have an A today. We'll give you an A grade, or you have a C today. But something could happen, positive or negative, between now and tomorrow, and I go from A to an F. If you look at the journey of Meta, for example, right? Facebook, formerly known as Facebook, started off very, very high trust because nobody really knew what was being collected. Then all of a sudden they find out, hey, you're capturing stuff on me. I'm not sure I like that. Trust goes down. Next thing you know, we start seeing the fight towards improper information or fact checking changes the trust a little bit, right? So if you look at Meta, throughout the years, their trust level's gone up and down. And today, they could be an all-time high or low. Kind of depends on the user, right? Depends on the person or the group we're talking about here. So I want to jump into how you measure this stuff. And Shannon mentioned this before. There's kind of that internal and external perspective. I believe that the best measure of digital trust is good old-fashioned business metrics by customers, right? Or do I have a high net promoter score if we're doing the NPS right? Those kinds of things. So I want to move on because Faisal, you had started talking about this a few minutes ago and shared a couple things with us about how we measure this thing called digital trust, or is there a digital trustworthy scale? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it's like a weighing scale. I've already lost 5 kgs in the last 2 months. So yes, as you people know, we have discussed a detail in the first webinar that what is the factors which are eroding the trust in these days. I can share with the recent the World Economic Forum, the WEF, they have released a global risk index for 2024, which was released last year. It has the top most risk is AI generated misinformation and disinformation. Unbelievable. Even though cybersecurity and privacy other factors are there, but the topmost was the AI generated in misinformation or disinformation, which we can see through the deep fakes and what is going on in this area right now. So measuring trust or through digital trustworthiness is not just a checklist or some kind of a score you can, or single score which can give you to that level. It's basically evaluating or assessing the organization's overall consistency in delivering the digital experiences in terms of security, privacy, reliability, ethical conduct, and most importantly, transparent and accountable manner. And but this is multidimensional. You cannot say just the NPV value can only give you the idea, but it has to be multidimensional. It should be giving the person or person who is dealing with you or the stakeholder that you are protecting against cyber threats. You are responsibly handling their data. You are not sharing the data outside, or it's using it only for the purpose it is intended for. You are transparently using the AI technology, and you are not including the bias into the models, or you know what is the model is doing and how it can explain this decision it has made. So and how you comply with the regulations. So all these things gives a customer a trust to buy from you, and that is not to be earned through any kind of just implementation of standard as we were discussing. It comes over time. Similarly, it gives the what you call the investors the trust in your organization. So I would say it's a savings account, which basically every good action of yours add into it, and every bad actions or like scandals or lies which you do with the customers, you claim false claims, it eroding it to the level which can be disastrous. I normally reckon as a snake and ladder kind of a thing. If you are delivering the services as per your plan, you are climbing up the ladder. If you are not fulfilling this SLAs, or you are not protecting the assets, or there are certain incidents in your organization which have eroded the availability of your customer, so that are the snakes for you. So I could say that very quickly that you can have two types of approaches which for measurement of trust. One is subjective, which is retrospective, like trust surveys, NPV value, which you have already mentioned. The sentiments on the social media is very, very important. And there are a lot of AI tools measuring the sentiments and on different forums. Then the very, very important is your peer review, the word of mouth, which is you give. So these are subjective kind of measurements which you can build over time with your services, the way you commit. And the objective way is to get the metrics against all these standards which you can deploy to cover the major areas which I have just nominated, or I call them the attributes of a digital trust. So security, privacy, then your what you call integrity, resilience, reliability, quality, and confidence. So these are the 8 factors I took just from the TTAF, and similarly are there in WEF framework. So these factors can be deployed by deploying certain standards in your organization and setting up the matrix against it. And or the most important thing, which I would say, not measure the capability of individual processes, but the maturity of your overall system, that over the life cycle of your organization, that how mature is your privacy or the security or your resilience in your organization. So these are the 2 main areas through which you do some kind of protection against your digital trustworthiness. And you can measure it by this way. So just to give you some examples, WhatsApp has revised the controversial privacy policy, and that was a huge hue and cry when they started sharing the data with the Facebook. So this was not something which was on the cards. It was immediately announced, and it was done. So you can imagine how it shaped it. But on the other side, there are certain organizations which have faced certain disasters, but fortunately they were very much what you call prudent to recover back by their actions, acceptability of the faults, giving the right reasons behind it. Like we saw 19 July 2024, what happened with CrowdStrike and Microsoft. So they immediately acted to it, but although the damage was done, 8.5 million computers were offline. So, but they were very fast to act. They admitted it and they came back into the arena. So all in all, the measurement depends the way you act, the way you what you call frame yourself, and the way you talk to your people, the way you communicate, and you don't hide things. You come up with to face the music.
I think, yeah, I agree. I agree with all of that. I think that there's two aspects here, like I had mentioned before. And I think, Faisal, you're mentioning a lot of the things that some large, especially some of these social media organizations or big tech, they can immediately see customer response to actions they're taking. A lot of us who are working in small to mediums don't get to see as much online activity in terms of social media or, reviews online. I think, you do have to take some intentional activity to say, how are we doing, right? And you then have to combine it with your internal measurement. And I think that external, like there are a lot of indicators, like you just said, the sentiments, customer sat scores, you could get NPS scores, right? I think it's also really good. I mean, those are all, pretty much other than the sentiments, quantitative responses. I think it's important that your product management teams are out there talking to your customers, right? And getting the conversations going about how people are feeling, just intentional communication there. When we talk about the internal side, to me, we have operated for years in some, and I'm not trying to diminish it, but some sort of checklist mentality. Have you done this? It's required. Yes, we've done it. Blah 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 blah. I think we're looking to use, and what we've done for some of our measurement aligned with our frameworks is taking our CMMI methodology and being able to assess against maturity and capability, so that people know here's the practice activities associated with the practice. Am I doing them? To what level? So that I can understand, yes, I've done this, but I need to do it at a higher level to get to a more trustworthy place internally, so that I can then communicate that externally, right? So if you are looking at access control and you've implemented password protection and strong policy around that, so that people are, having to have long passwords, and even if people don't like it, that practice is there, you may get a level 1 or 2. I'm just making this up, right? And a more mature level might be having an MFA, or having MFA implemented and enforcing it, right? So that you can see that there's various levels of controls and test maturity within the organizational practices. So that's internally. Externally, like we said, I mean, I do think there needs to be intentional communication, either through your product team, your marketing team, whoever, your communications team, somebody who's getting a constant feedback from your customer base. And also you can be looking at, like, there are organizations that are running trust indexes, like you mentioned. So like Edelman puts out their trust index, annually, so that you can go and see things there. It's hard because you could be doing all the right things in the organization and be potentially at a 3 or 4 in terms of maturity. Everybody's got some, some things they can improve on. But if people don't know the things you're doing, they may not trust you. And you're also dealing with a wide array of emotions, right? People can trust and lose that trust for a variety of reasons that might not have anything to do with how you handled their information. It may be how have you done something, politically to alienate customers, right? are your ESG policies in place, and do they feel like that they're in a good spot? I think that intentional communication is key here.
And by the way,
Exactly.
there are hints of ES and G in the DTEP as well.
Mhm.
Yep,
Yes, ESG.
you got it. Shashila, you out there?
Yes, yes. You know, I love this conversation. And I thought one of the things that was really, really interesting is I was reading a book by April Doss, who wrote a book on privacy. And she was using a very interesting scenario where a company in Massachusetts offered to chip their employees so you could wave your hand and it would work on the vending machine. Now, what was very interesting was almost half of employees stepped forward and said, yes, chip me so I can do this in front of the vending machine and they'll give me whatever it is. So, you know, and of course we know these chips could be used for far more. They could be used for tracking the employees, you know, and you would have thought, interestingly enough, that that employees would be, you know, loath to be chipped because people were, you know, have a lot of fears associated with that. But what is interesting is that there were a number of folks that kind of stepped forward for it. And also within there was the fact that people were polled as well about, hey, how much do I have to pay you to stay off Facebook, right? Facebook is a free product, and we all know the joke, right? If the product is free, then you are the product. Again, people said you would have to pay them $100 a month, implying that people understand to some extent that their data is being used. Where I think we have a real problem, and let's face it, right, is we have a public education problem. Just like we had a public education problem about security, there's a public education problem about trust. People don't understand what are the attributes of trust, and therefore it's open to, you know, misinformation, manipulation, and confusion. And so I do believe governments have to step forward. We have to teach people critical thinking, understand the implications. And, you know, it's wonderful the EU did things like say, hey, you know, you've got cookies that are taking data about people and selling it somewhere. You got to tell them and get their consent. A lot of people don't understand why they have to click that box. And they're like, I always just click yes. So, and it will catch up. You know, I do believe people are becoming more concerned about this, but I do, you know, I also think that we should be very, very aware of this. And when we were discussing as well metrics around, you know, how do we measure trust? And I think certainly by measuring external trust, it's an indicator, much like where we look at, hey, what is the security of, let's say, the Ring doorbell or other products like that? We kind of measure it generally around breach information. But what I really like is as we became more mature, we started measuring internally this idea of shifting left, right? Where we say, hey, if we don't want, you know, to have a breach or a loss of trust, let's measure behavior a little earlier in that cycle so that we really understand whether people are doing trust by design. And you know, when we look at something like application development, where we really had to get people to reinvent the way that they did application design through things like DevSecOps and not just DevOps, right? I think that measurement of the behavior and the cultural signals that are internal to an organization is a shift left approach that will be reflected in the NPS scores of customers as we educate internally, which is almost easier than externally, but, you know, around things like not just cybersecurity, which, you know, we're really improving. We're maturing our frameworks. We're doing great, you know, evolution there. We still have issues, but we're generally progressing in the right way. So we will do so with trust. And, you know, the digital trust ecosystem framework is wonderful because it's actually stepping forward and going, you know, that trust can't be a byproduct of security, right? Trust is much, much more. It's not just an outcome or a byproduct. It has to be intentional. We all have to understand the impact of being transparent about the way that I use your data and also what the impact could potentially be to you. So there's some thoughts there, Mark, just throwing it all
it was
in.
a great perspective, because I have a question coming up here in a couple slides that I want you to take what you just said, and I want you to take that to the next level. And I know you can, because I want to talk culture a little bit. But I need to move on in a second. Any follow-ups to this comment?
Just one thing. I think it's really important where Sushila just touched on. And I think when we are talking about trust, we have to remember that the things that we've said, and we haven't touched on all of them, right? Trust is different for everybody. Okay. And I think one of the things that we haven't really talked about as much is integrity. And I don't mean integrity that our information, that what went in is coming out. I mean integrity of the organization, and what I say I'm going to do, I deliver that, right? So like, I want to know that if I'm buying something from you, that I am getting what I expected, right? And I think when we start talking about trust, it goes in such there's such a line, an array of what it could be. And I think, you just said, Sushila, that people are getting more concerned with how information is handled. And I think I agree with you, but I also think it depends on how do they feel about the company. If because some people are just at this point apathetic, right? Their information's been lost a million times. They're getting, mailings from credit bureaus all the time. If they are receiving what they thought they were going to receive, they may continue to go back in spite of these things. So we have to look at the whole organization.
Yeah, got it. And that makes total sense. Kind of wraps up a lot of that. Frameworks, DTEF, we talked about measuring trust. So if y'all don't mind, I'd like to move on to what I think is a pretty important questions here, because a lot of people are saying, well, what gets in the way, right? And we'll talk culture in just a little bit. But Gary, I want to kick off with you, because when you're adopting these standards, you're adopting frameworks, or you're complying to laws and those kinds of things. There are some challenges out there. So I want to push it off to you and see if you got some comments here.
Yeah, look, there are lots of challenges. I was exploring all of the challenges I've come across in my career with my clients in my consulting kind of work, with the people that sit through the training that I do, and just sort of looking around the industry. And I was fascinated by that figure if you've got it there, the figure 6 in the ISACA survey, because I want to hone in on the second and fourth.
This
In
is
that
the Digital Trust 2024 survey. Yep, got
state
it.
of
Right.
digital trust, yeah. And it was a question that was about the heading there, obstacles for attaining digital trust. And the question you posed to me about, what are the challenges? I was looking at this and thinking, wow, some of the challenges I had are very similar to some of the things in this list. But in particular, the second and the fourth ones really stand out for me, because I want to hone in on what I see is probably the most fundamental challenge that people face. And that is they really struggle to get senior leadership engagement in the execution of whatever framework or approach or problem they're trying to solve in the digital trust space, whether it's security or privacy or cyber, or even assurance frameworks or whatever. But getting senior leadership engaged to the point that, and this is what I'm after, the second one, that they actually start to take ownership of the outcomes of digital trust in whatever silo that might mean for them, as a part of delivering business services, as a leader of the business, making sure that as an executive that they take ownership. Now you'll see the word buy-in in that second bullet point, lack of leadership buy-in.
Yep.
That's one of the phrases I really dislike. And I do a lot of ISO 27001 training, and there's a word in ISO 27001, clause 5,
Leadership commitment.
it's leadership and commitment. And I tell people in my training, I don't want their commitment. I want them to own it and the executive, I want them to own this program of work, and I want them to be accountable, to step up and be accountable for the outcomes we get. And when you look in your digital trust framework, there's a little cascade there. It's called framework components. And it has in it some trust factors, and then it has outcomes. So
Yep.
for me, the biggest challenge is how do trust professionals get their executive, the leadership of the team. Shannon mentioned product owners and, whoever it might be across the business, to actually take ownership, because they're the ones that can influence those other things on the screen there. The third one, lack of budget. If the senior leadership, the product owner, chief product owner, or whatever it might be, or I don't know, CEO even, gosh, if we could get that high, if they start to take ownership in this stuff, then the other problems on this slide fade away. Budget appears, skills and training start to become things that they go, we need to prioritize this stuff, which is the fifth one, not a priority. If you make them aware of their accountability to their stakeholders, and we've talked about that broad group of people, or interested parties, if we can engage better with senior leadership as a digital trust perspective, a digital trust professional. Now, part of your question was to throw it over on. By the way, I added there was a sentence, whoever wrote this, there was a sentence that was sort of where I was headed. When internal influencers, let's call that digital trust kind of professionals, actively advocate for digital trust, we gain the senior leadership. Now, I'm going to change the word buy-in to ownership and accountability.
That's
And
fair.
that then cascades into priority, alignment with what they want, their prioritization of activities, budgets, training, and the resources needed to get
There's a
it done. Now, I
big
know
difference
that's
between buy-in and ownership, right?
ownership and accountability.
Yeah,
Not just say, like buy-in is when a CEO signs off on a policy and says, yeah, I signed that off last year. We should
I
be
support
secure
it.
now,
Yeah.
aren't we? That's kind of the limit of buy-in. But I want them to own it. I want them to have accountability for what we get from it. And because they own the processes that enable digital trust or disable it. And there's a phrase that I use in my training that I link to this, that's a really close parallel that engages them. And instead of asking the risk question, because I'm not a risk management fan, I actually dislike risk management concepts, and have for a very long time. Instead of asking the what can go wrong question, leaders should be asked, what must we do well to succeed? And if you stick digital trust in there, what must we do well in digital trust for our business to succeed? And you can now explore that with a dozen other questions. And I've written them all down, but I won't have time tonight to go through them.
It takes a bigger piece of paper to answer that one, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But they can now answer that, or you collectively collaborate on the answers to that question, because it starts to build out the solution to getting their buy-in, their commitment, their ownership, their accountability, because you can now flesh that out. The DTEF provides a wonderful resource to answer that question. What must we do well to succeed? The trust factors in there are things you could almost, dare I say it, Shashila, checklist your way through it and CMMI your way through it to say, where are we in terms of these things? Which of these are the most important? Which are the priorities today? Which are the ones that really could hurt us in a risk sense or an incident sense? And so there's a lot of value for me in solving the challenge of engagement with your leadership, and to try and then get their accountability, their ownership and accountability for the results. So that's my answer to your question, Mark.
No, that's actually
Happy to
perfect.
have
And
disagreement.
that we oh, am I on mute? Oh no, I'm good. So, and
No, you're
actually,
good.
I think we kicked off this thing with Rolf talking about frameworks, right? We're kind of zoning in, talking about some challenges. I want to kick it back to Rolf again, right? Rolf, we're
Yeah.
talking frameworks, we're talking challenges. What kind of input do you have here?
Well, I mean, just to echo what you said, Gary, do you mind flipping the survey to the benefits thing?
Actually, this is just a single slide, so I didn't have the full one sitting in front of me. I can find it,
Well,
but
so
we may
okay,
be running out of time soon.
yeah, let me put this in words. So this is what you see here is the obstacles, the challenges, and the downside. I would counter that by saying in that same survey, you find a slide that says what are the main benefits of having a stronger level of digital trust. And as I said all along, survey respondents said that 27% experienced higher top line revenue when doing it right. I repeat that for you.
Absolutely.
27% of respondents said we did it right and we have measurable increases in our top line revenue. Now, if I walk into the CEO's office saying, look, 27% of firms are actually experiencing, a growth, business growth. You make more money. Every CEO in this world, I promise you, is going to probably say, well, young man or not so young man, why don't you
There
stay
you go,
for
Rolf.
longer? Here we go. Yeah, it's the last one down there. Do you give that one to the CEO and say, well, do you want to belong to that top quarter of firms, 27%, or do you want to belong to the others? He's going to say, Rolf, stay a little longer, explain this to me. How do I get into the 27% bracket?
How you get their attention, right?
Well, no one's going to send me away
Absolutely.
if I do this. Anyway, so having said that, what are the challenges? I talk to a lot of C-levels here and there. I give a lot of conference presentations. C-levels, when you talk to them directly, they will say, this is interesting. I like this. Let me give it to the project because I do not really want to micromanage them. And they will respond. And then the project, because they're very much afraid of the C-level, are going to say what? Oh, we believe we're in a pretty good position. Everything is fine. Everything is green. Nothing to worry about. Hunky-dory. And then you lose it right in the middle. So that disconnect between C-levels on the one hand and the project or the line on the other hand is often difficult to bridge. So we need to work on that by saying, well, the C-level message, as you see it here, is a fairly easy one. Now, the next step is we need to have a concept of who is the C-level who runs that. We're talking about senior management, the board, the executive committee, consisting of several people who are all C-levels. Now, do they want a higher workload? Do they want it on their budget? No. They will say, no, 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 Mark's going to do it. No, Greg's going to do it, not me. No, no, this is not my remit. So we have to work on challenge number one, say, well, how do we make it more transparent to say, well, part of that sits in risk, part of that sits in finance, part of that sits at the executive level, and part of it may be sales. The second challenge that I often see with this is that they then say, well, but we don't have DT, digital trust people. Who's qualified? What do you need to know to actually do this digital trust thing? What's the qualification? Have you done this like in the US? We're seeking a dynamic young person who's done this for 25 years in a similar firm. Well, you won't find that. So qualifications and making sure that you have the right people, call them internal champions, call them internal influencers. And it's not just about influencing, it's about implementing. So you have to have people who do this, whether they're external consultants or whether they're internal, it doesn't matter. But there must be a team that is actually capable of bringing this thing to life and actually implementing the framework. For those of us who are a little older, remember the days when people tried to implement COVID, the processes and the pain that was connected
That's
to
what
that.
caused all the gray. That caused all the gray.
Yeah, look here and here, I was been there, done that. No, but for all the others and for our good attendees, I'd say that, it's always a good mix of having, say, seasoned external consultants who are not just selling you digital trust as a buzzword, but who really know this stuff, who get you to the 27%, who get you to the 27%, and use internals to actually build up your organizational fabric, your network, the relationships that you need, and most importantly, to be able to carry on when the consultants have left, hopefully one day, instead of charging forever. But that's kind of my 2 cents worth.
Agreed.
So,
No, I agreed, folks. I thought that was awesome. My apologies for pushing us a little bit too quick on this one. This is a big one next. I want to jump into this. Sushila, we've been talking a little bit about culture. We've been talking about those things. This is kind of an area where I believe, just based on knowing you and being your friend, this is a huge area for you. Attitudes, behaviors. What are some things that you believe that needs to be in place for this to be successful?
Yes, I think, really, I love Peter Drucker's quote here, right? That culture will eat strategy for breakfast. And it really is true, is, how do you build the right attitudes and behaviors? And that's where we really moved beyond security. And there are still companies today where security is a checkbox, right? Where you're doing it just because you made to. But a lot of companies now have a much more mature attitude towards security and understand, because they've been hit so many times, right, what the benefits clearly are. And again, this is kind of educational around the benefits and values of educating your workforce and creating a culture of digital trust. I thought there was a very interesting study in 2022 where they actually ran phishing simulation globally and looked at what countries actually were the best at being able to understand whether they could trust this email or this that had come in. And here, actually, interestingly enough, countries like Finland and Denmark, Europe, really showing the highest scores where they've actually started teaching critical thinking at school. Now, we can't go back with our employees and say, hey, we're gonna, we're gonna start teaching you critical trust back at kindergarten. But what we can do is actually start putting digital trust into our policies, into our behavior, our leadership behavior, and into our priorities, because there's clearly a lot of benefits around this. And what we're looking for is transparency. Do you trust a friend that's not transparent with you? If your husband goes, hey, I'm going out at 7 to 9, but I can't tell you where, right? Transparency is so critical to trust. And this idea, again, I think that Shannon mentioned around accountability and, this ethical mindset. And the rewards are there, and it's not a huge lift. We think about something like zero trust. We didn't invent a whole new framework. We augmented and we understood the principles, right? So that we could do. And I think, the wonderful work that ISACA has done around that has been really, really helpful as well, so that we can have a framework to understand and cultivating those. Very often when we're developing metrics, we develop metrics around technology. We don't really develop metrics around behavioral indicators like, the number of trust-related incidents, or, integral to trust is things like data minimization, right? So that when you're actually developing a product, you're not just hoarding all the data just in case, you might need it or you could sell it, right? So teaching and building into the culture and understanding of why it's important that your organization is one that you want your customers to really trust. When I think about, as I mentioned, this difference between now application security and the way it used to be, in order to be invited to the table, to be invited to conversations as they build out new products, is really explaining to the organization what is the benefit of it, that it is that it's a journey, much like cybersecurity, right? It's a journey. Remember when we were grateful when people were using unique passwords, and now we're all like, hey, you got to use MFA, you what? You're not using MFA? It's a journey and it's an evolution. And so this idea of being able to not just measure, but also to reward, as we did when we were developing other behaviors,
The
right?
reward structure is important. Yeah.
Yeah. What is the reward for a for an employee that's contributing to digital trust? What is the reward for an employee who didn't just fix a security bug, but also recognize the principle of data minimization or transparency? You know, when we reward and educate, that's where we influence behavior. And really starting from that top, so leadership themselves understand what the benefit is and what are the behaviors that they need to show so that it can be mirrored through the organization, so that we can measure using much wonderful metrics that we can actually have a look at there, and then develop those key attitudes around transparency, accountability, respect for privacy, right?
Yeah.
Resilience, ethical awareness, consistency, these and measuring that back in the metrics that we've all discussed. So it isn't a checkbox approach. It isn't just about auditability and ticking a box and going, hey, you know, it's that the whole organization is embedding those values and understand why it's important to behave in this fashion. You know, why is it important to show respect for other people's data, you know, and an understanding of what it means when you're not showing that. Everybody wants to work for an ethical company, I think. Most people, you know, unless you're taking up a you know, career in criminal expertise, but generally, you know, that's what people want, right? And
Yeah.
they're get behind you and support this because it feels good when you're working for an organization or even living in a country that shows ethical values and values around that reflect the need, you know, the capability for you to be able to trust them. And I think it's so evident when people are polled and they are actually buying products or voting for people or selecting relationships, that trust is at the heart of all of these. And so, you know, I don't think there can be any greater argument towards really infusing organizations with the culture and behavior of trust.
You know what? I think you nailed that one. You really nailed that. I actually learned a lot just listening to some of your comments. I like the recognition and rewards kinds of things there too. And this is a subject that actually could be an entire hour and a half. I have a feeling, especially if you're explaining it to us. But my apologies to everybody because I do have one more thing that I want to hit.
Just one point, just to carry on this point, there are ISO standards which is talking about whistleblowing, and that is 37,002, and there is a standard about talking about the ethical behavior. So all in all, the one thing I would close it up, the leadership has to talk the walk, or the walk the talk, whatever you call it. So they have to make this ingrown into the organization that if you say something, if you raise something which is going on, like something is being introduced into the model, AI model, because why I'm talking this, these days, these are the main area which is requiring trust. So biasness can be built into the model. And if somebody detects it, it's not a bug. It has to be raised. There must be a way to raise it and that's what Sushila said. It must be rewarded, not punished.
Got it. Agreed. Folks, my apologies to you, Greg. I've got one last thing I need to run to you, and I'm going to push you down to less than 2 minutes on this one because I want to do a roundup with everybody. We may go 1 or 2 minutes over on this. Greg, let's talk about your advice here on selecting, adopting standards, frameworks, and bodies of knowledge.
Well, thanks, Mark. And I think it's really back to the future. It really goes back to much of what we've been saying here. You know, when I first started working with ISACA, I think I came in on COBIT 4. But one of the things that COBIT taught me was based on John Cotter's work about leading change. And that's about leadership and vision. This much of what we're saying here. I love that Gary had fostered the idea of using enterprise architecture. It's all about building a plan. You know, and to bring it back to CMMI, level 5 is all about predictability. Not just can we measure how well we did yesterday, but can we look for leading indicators on how we should be to gain that digital trust? So I think it's not so much about this framework or that one is is mandatory, but it's more about building that composite view as leaders who have ownership. I love that Gary's Nation has a Vision 2030, that you have a digital transformation agency. You may have some ideas on how well that will or won't go, but I love that they have a vision for where it should be as a nation. And I hope that others can learn from that example. So I think it's about using these frameworks collectively, holistically. That was one of the things in COVID too, having a holistic approach. Just build a holistic approach to gaining this trust and maintaining it so that we can get the benefits that Rolf described from our ISACA survey. So just have a plan, make a plan, and that can also be my closing thought.
Yep. Very cool. And my apologies. I know I had to push us a little bit on that one, but here's what I want to do. Let's do a roundtable. Shannon, I know you have a hard stop in less than a minute. So let's do this. Everybody give me your final nuggets, and I'm going to move on and tell everybody about our next webinar. Shannon, go for it.
I think just really quickly, we know that people have framework fatigue. I think finding one, whichever one you're going to use, that is going to work for you and that the organization can get behind is the most critical thing here. Ideally, we would, love to see holistic trust built through a framework that has common goals and objectives. But I think whatever your organization is willing to really be accountable to and is right for them is the one that you need to really focus with.
Nice. Yep. Makes a lot of sense. Hey, let's move on to Rolf, your 30-second nugget.
I'd say for all attendees out there, it's a journey, and there are several other things behind the detail that we haven't had time to talk about. I think it's a good strategy to start out with a strategic view, like you said, Shannon, and then move on there step by step. How do you eat an elephant? Bite by bite. But it's doable, it's manageable, and if you need anything, we're all out here to help assist or answer further questions. That's me for now.
Awesome. Thank you. Faizo, let's go to you next. Your nugget.
Yeah, just very quickly, I would like to say that leadership has to first acknowledge the trust gap. They need to embed the trust in different areas right from the beginning. And number one, in these days, the development of AI, transparency is the key for them to build the culture of trust within the organization and let the people talk. And that is very, very important. And regarding the standards, these standards can help you, but these are not just checklists. They need to be embedded like something which is ingrown into your organization, so that people can feel the difference outside and change the perception about your organization.
Got it. Sushila, you, then Greg.
Great, thanks, Mark. So at its core, I believe digital trust is about human decisions and consistent behavior, not just firewalls and frameworks. Trust is earned through behavior, how we design, how we communicate, how we respond to risk. It's about what people actually do when no one is watching. Transparency, accountability, empathy, integrity, it has to be modeled at every level. And, finally, I will say that, that organizations that earn loyalty, resilience, and long-term value, it comes through trust. And let's lead with trust because it's the right thing to do. And so, yeah.
Got it. Perfect. Greg, let's go to you, and then we'll finish up.
Well, I love that we've started, talking, Shannon was, talking about zero trust. And what that really means is zero assumed trust. Of course, we want trust, but it means you don't by default trust anyone. So this whole ecosystem is about understanding, what do we trust? What don't we trust? What shouldn't we trust? How do we improve our trust? So, I love that this is, as we look for ways to bridge those gaps and build those bridges, how do we think about, what should we trust and what shouldn't we trust? How do we document that and make a way forward?
Got it. Hey, Gary, you want to close us up?
Sure. Actually, I wrote a sentence down because I thought I'd probably be jumbled with ideas, but this is what I wrote. And what's weird is Shushkila has already said it, and so has Greg. What I wrote is this: combining the best bits of all these frameworks is a no-brainer. And it enables, and here's what you said already, Shushkila, it enables digital trust by design. If you're not using some form of framework, you'll probably have design by disaster. And so many organizations do that. They have an incident and then they do design. And you think, well, that's no architectural model. That's no principles-based approach to trust. So digital trust by design, these frameworks are out there. There's no excuse for not exploring and understanding them and picking the pieces out that make them work for your business.
You got it. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been awesome to be with on this. Sorry, I felt like I had to rush us towards the end, but there's so much that every one of you all can share. Looking forward to next week. For anybody out on this call, you most likely are signed up for this, where we're going to be talking a little bit more about digital trust, cybersecurity, privacy, kind of going into that mixture with the zero trust, digital trust. And you notice we have another group of panelists on that. The panelists that are on this webinar may also be on that next one, but they're not required to because everybody has a lot more things to do than just webinars, right? So look forward to seeing everybody. And for my esteemed colleagues here on the call, I have learned so much from you today. I appreciate all of your information and everything you've been able to share. And it's my pleasure to have talked with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Much.
Thank
all.
you, Mark. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Mark.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, Rolf, Greg, Gary, Sushila.
Bye all.
Great conversation.